Welcome back. A week from today, Hong Kong will mark the 4th anniversary of the territory's return to Chinese rule after a century and a half as a British colony. The change of sovereignty in 1997 has meant little to one small group of Hong Kong residents, though. These people are among the territory's prison offenders, sentenced to life behind bars. And in their case, life really does seem to mean life, because they were all given indefinite jail terms. Susan Yu has the story.
The outcome becomes some torture physically and mentally.
They basically fall between the cracks.
They want to do something for the society as well.
For relatives of murder victims, it's time well served. But for relatives of the juveniles who killed, it's time painfully wasted. More than a dozen offenders are imprisoned at Her Majesty's pleasure, known today in post-1997 Hong Kong as detention at the Chief Executive's discretion. They were given indeterminate sentences because at the time of their murder convictions, they were juveniles.
It's based on the idea that, we're not certain exactly about what the cause or etiology of that behaviour is. So it's an insinuation, I think, that the young offender maybe can be rehabilitated or treated in some sort of way, and knowing when that would be an appropriate time to release them is uncertain.
The element of uncertainty is no accident. The former British colony's penal system is based on common law, which dictates that juveniles who commit grave offences are given indefinite sentences. The logic behind a custodial verdict is to provide what's supposed to be leniency to juvenile offenders.
The Department of Correctional Services here has a long-term prisoners review board. Its primary job is to look at particularly capital cases or long-term prisoner cases with a view to making recommendations about their release, typically after they've served anywhere between 20 or more years.
Make no mistake, the inmates committed heinous crimes as youngsters. This is a letter from one of them.
Who never makes a mistake? An officer asked me how I felt about my situation. I said I not only recognize my sins, but repent them more deeply today, even though it's too late, since I committed the crime already. But I can't understand why I have no chance to serve society. I committed murder at a young age, and if the law wanted me to be hung in the gallows, I would willingly and gladly accept it. But since the law hasn't killed me, why can't I be treated the same way as others who committed crimes like me?
Relatives of victims may not be sympathetic, but critics of the system say the endless detention is indefensible, cruel, and painful. Legislator Leung Yu-chung has been fighting with the families of inmates to get fixed terms for the offenders. He says prisoners have the right to know how long they should serve, even if it means a life sentence.
The government would insist what they are doing is right. But I would say that if the government really concerned about the decision made by the European Human Rights Court in 1991, they got to change the system, because the European Human Rights Court already said this kind of system is really inhuman. And also the court urged each of the government got to change the system as soon as possible.
We requested an interview with the Government Security Bureau to ask whether it felt indeterminate sentences were a violation of human rights. The Bureau declined our request, but responded in a written statement, saying,
"We have already put in place a fair and transparent system to determine the minimum terms of young offenders detained at the Executive's discretion, and regularly review their sentences in line with the principles promulgated by the European Court of Human Rights."
But many ask, is it really a fair system? Yip Kai-foon was once Hong Kong's most dangerous and wanted fugitive. He headed the most feared crime gang in Hong Kong. It was known for its string of brutal armed robberies that left several casualties in the early 1990s. Yet even he knows where he stands. In May 1996, Yip was finally caught and given a 41-year prison term for armed robbery. However, with good behavior in jail, he could be eligible for parole in 23 years. Prisoners detained at the chief executive's discretion, on the other hand, must serve at least 30 years before they're even considered for a determinate sentence. Families only gained this concession after lobbying for many years when the law was changed in 1997. However, 4 years on, no maximum prison term has been set. Before Hong Kong changed from British rule to Chinese sovereignty in 1997, Governor Chris Patten ordered 2 inmates detained at Her Majesty's pleasure released. 4 others were subsequently given determinate sentences. But today, 14 offenders aren't any closer in finding out how much more time they'll have to do to pay for their crimes. In fact, in one case, a 33-year-old inmate who was convicted of murder at the age of 14 still languishes in prison, not knowing his fate.
I find that society is getting further and further away because of the circumstances of the crime I committed were heavily publicized. I think this is why I'm being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure.
Have you actually met some of the prisoners?
Yeah, I met them several times, and I talked with them a very long time. And they said, at the first beginning, they said they want this government would be the Chinese government. I said, why? They said, oh, it's so easy, because the Chinese government would give us the bullet to kill ourselves, and that would be the end of our problem.
The Chief Executive and the Long-Term Prison Review Board have the powers to decide the fate of the HMP prisoners. Rights activists are urging the board to be more transparent and proactive when they examine cases every 2 years.
I want the Long-Term Review Board to interview each of the non-sentenced prisoners in prison, because in the past experience, the Long-Term Review Board only to read all the documents written by the Correction Service Department. They are not really to talk with the prisoners. I found that this is not really fair to the prisoners, no matter they are adult or the juvenile prisoners.
The government, though, defends the board's work. It maintains that
the regular reviews by the board recognize the propensity of young people to change as they mature and ensure proper monitoring and consideration of each prisoner's rehabilitation progress, so the board may consider making a recommendation of a determinate sentence to the Chief Executive at a suitable juncture.
Ultimately, what an indeterminate sentence does is it inhibits both the offender and the correctional agency that's working with that person. It inhibits them from actually dealing with that person's ultimate release and their preparation for release and so on. So it's unfair, and it also, I think, actually undermines any sort of reformative, rehabilitative effort that the agency and the individual might be trying to pursue.
It's a message that has made it onto the big screen. Early this year, the documentary From the Queen to the Chief Executive was released. Herman Yao directed the documentary, which won acclaim in Hong Kong and overseas.
You see, something begins with a good intention but ends with a very bad consequence, and it's very ridiculous. And this kind of ridiculous things that really happen in our society. And actually, I think this kind of ridiculous things that happen all over the world.
But unlike the movies, don't count on the issue of indeterminate sentences having an ending. Families of the inmates say they aren't hopeful the future of their loved ones will be resolved soon. And ironically, time has become a constant and cruel reminder. The only thing they can do is wait.
Legislator Leung Yu-chung is taking his campaign on behalf of Hong Kong's discretionary prisoners one step further. He plans to table a private member's bill in Hong Kong's legislature seeking sentence reviews of all 14 prisoners detained at the chief executive's discretion. His bill will need to secure the written consent of Hong Kong's chief executive, Tung Chee-hwa, since it relates to government operations.